Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dixon. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. And that little opening introduction is never more relevant than when I'm talking to a guest who is on the opposite side of the world. We must never forget that, of course, we're based in the UK, but we've got loads of friends internationally within the events industry, and really important that we drop in on those friends from time to time to make sure that things are growing as well in their region as they are over here, and indeed to maybe share some of the sort of the pitfalls, find out about the issues that they're dealing with, the successes that they've had, and see how that compares to the work that you guys are doing on a day-to-day basis. In February this year, the Asia Pacific Incentives and Meetings event brought together 675 exhibitors from 30 countries and hosted close to 20,000 meetings, cementing its position as the premier platform for the business events industry in that region. Taking place in Melbourne, Australia, independent post-show research and analysis projected that 400 million Australian dollars in business transactions between exhibitors and buyers would take place within the next year, a 21% increase compared with the 2024 event. The event is owned by the Melbourne Convention Bureau and managed by Talk to Media and Events. Joining the podcast today to tell us more about AIME 2025 is the CEO of Talk to Media and Events, Matt Pearce. Matt, a very good morning or evening to you, and a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, James. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, it's evening, just about an hour away from a drink.
Fantastic. An hour away from a drink. Well, I would have hoped that we could have made this a relaxed episode of the podcast.
We should have started an hour later.
Very kind of you to wait another hour before you treat yourself to a beverage. Matt, the preamble there said that the Asia Pacific Incentives and Meetings event is really very much the leading and premier event in that part of the world for the business events industry. Talk to Media and Events manage that on behalf, as I said, of the Melbourne Convention Bureau. To give us a little bit of a background to the event, if you may, and just give us a bit of a history for those who may not be familiar with it.
So, yes, it's unusual for an event to be owned by a convention bureau for a start. So it was started 33 years ago by the Melbourne Convention Bureau. And they soon realized that they did it to promote Melbourne, which is not unreasonable. But of course, they realized that they're always going to be limited just on promoting Melbourne. So they did have the foresight to say, actually, this could be a proper event. This could be an independent event. And so fairly soon afterwards, they put it out to tender, and it was a variety of different companies. The most recent is us. Prior to us was Reed for 15 or 20 years. And they ran it because obviously they have IBTM and they could see it as a useful adjunct to that. Sure. So we've been running it now since 2019. So we ran one and then didn't.
Indeed. It gave you time to take stock.
Sorry?
It gave you time to take stock, maybe, at
least.
Well,
I was going to say, in some ways, so, events have a cycle. And for a while there, AIME was a bit on the wane. 2015, 2016, 2017, it was not firing on all cylinders, range of different reasons. We weren't running it, so it's difficult to know exactly what it was. But the best thing that happened to AIME, really, in some ways, was this proverbial line in the sand where we had to stop. We had no choice. We were actually the last international event in Melbourne before borders were closed.
Sure.
And we actually were closed for China in that last event. And then we were actually the first event coming out. So the timing was everything. But it was a much smaller event, of course, when we were coming out, because we didn't have any internationals. The borders literally had opened a week before. And so you've got this, but this line in the sand where everybody said, okay, we now need something. And AIME is it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when what's it like now, sort of, 5 years on from that, when somebody like me sort of meets you for the first time on a podcast on the opposite side of the world, and you hear terms like $400 million being bandied around in business. I mean, that's a staggering amount of money to be projected coming out of your event.
Yeah, it is. Although you did put the proviso, they're Australian dollars, so they're not nearly as valuable as US dollars, of course. But no, the principle is well made. That we obviously do the surveys along with everybody else, and we ask what business is coming out of it. And 400 was very real, and I think it really. I think the technical part of it is that it will be transacted within the next 12 months. But of course, a lot of these events have long lead times. So the event may not be until 2028 or something, but it's all contractually created. And so, but it also shows that the Asia Pacific region is in rude health. There's a lot going on. Convention bureaus are active. There's a fair amount of a deep understanding of the value of business events. And so there is a lot going on, and it's a very competitive landscape. So, you've got Hong Kong, you've got Korea, you've got Japan, you've got Thailand, Philippines, wherever it may be. They're all active in seeking, new business. And so that creates a healthy atmosphere on the show floor.
And you've got, geographically, the region is vast, it goes without saying. But when you look at the territories, the cities, the actual places that fall into that region, that they're powerhouses of business in many respects. Look at places like Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Sydney. These are huge cities to have sort of within. Even though it's geographically vast, it's always struck me Asia Pacific as having I feel like it's got a sense of community to it. Like it sort of has, it does feel like it's got an identity, and it works collaboratively. Is that sort of a fair feeling to have from somebody who lives a distance away?
Look, I think yes, it's collaborative in the same way Europe is collaborative in by and large. So if you take a show like IMEX, there's competition, but everybody knows each other and they're friendly, and the Asia Pacific is no different. I mean, I think the staggering thing about Asia Pacific is, of course, if you include, and you should, India and China in there, you've got 2/3 of the world's population in this region. Now, that in itself, whilst India is really emerging and China is out and running, there's still vast amounts of opportunity coming out of those two markets as they really take on, and embrace the world itself. So, we see that the Asia Pacific is really strong. I mean, we can all talk stories of so forth, but you've got the strong US market in and of itself. You've got a strong European market kind of in and of itself, and then you've got a place like Asia Pacific that can play with everybody if they choose to.
Yeah, and you've got, again, one of the figures that I popped into the sort of preamble, if you will, is 675, international exhibitors, and presumably those exhibitors, that they're not just going to be from that region either. You're then dealing on a far broader scale. I'm guessing and assuming that those 675, you've got people coming from outside of that region as well. So you've got languages to deal with, different sort of protocols from an exhibitor point of view. If we can focus on that for a minute, that presents a huge challenge in its own right, just dealing with the exhibitors.
It does. I mean, it's got to be said that English is still the language of business, international business, and so yes, you're right. You can lose things and the nuances across language, but by and large, most people will deal if they are looking to run an event in Asia Pacific outside of their own country. Often the common language is going to be English that they negotiate in and work in. So yes, it's a challenge, but again, I grew up in England, and our version of speaking another language was speaking more loudly. So we weren't necessarily whereas the world now is a completely different place to that, and people learn the languages that they need to work in, and kudos to them. And then you've got Google Translate and all of the other tools that you can use. So Actually, I think business is becoming easier in many ways from an international perspective.
And interestingly, that you mentioned about Google Translate, things like that. Just referring to one of the news stories that was on the AIME25 website post event, with the sort of 5 key takeaways that came out of the event, and number one of those was a topic that's really sort of at the forefront of the global events industry: AI revolutionizing events. And when you talk about English being the common language. That said, it's so much easier to communicate now, isn't it? Because of the AI tools that we've got. I've no doubt that you will have had event tech suppliers that are very much sort of part of the exhibition front at the event, and demonstrating some of that technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the technology in general, we saw a huge spike when we couldn't run events, and then and in values of the tech, and then some of that came off when we all came back and started running events again very quickly. And I think that just served to say we do embrace the technology, but it's got to have a real value to it. And that's where we're at. I think with AI, we all understand inherently that there is a great value to it, and it will simplify things. We take a view that a bit like the internet was going to kill all events, because everything was going to go online and virtual and so forth. And this was a long time ago. We then realized that we're all very complementary to each other. And I think the same approach is AI, that what it will do is free us up to give better service to both our visitors and our exhibitors. You can have forms more readily in different languages or whatever it may be. So I think AI is we're all struggling with how best to use it. So the question isn't do we use it, it's how best we use it, and that's a fun challenge, really.
Yeah, we all seem to be at that kind of where we find ourselves, as human beings every now and then. Is it a juncture, when something comes along, is how we know that it can be useful, but how do we use it effectively? That's sort of my takeaway at the moment, is that it's there. More and more people are starting to use it, but we're very much sort of in a period of time where it's like, how best do we do it? And
let me tell you a quick story. I won't name names, but I was judging an industry competition, if you like, and because the presentations were coming from all of the sort of countries we've just spoken about, Philippines and Thailand and so forth, that inevitably the students were using AI. And on one of them, it said, it was a beautiful piece, well written and well argued. And then at the very end of it said, would you like me to make this into a work brochure or a web page? So
come
you've
on,
got this
people,
really strong piece of
formatting.
work that's undone, but
Oh,
the principle
no.
behind well-reasoned and so forth, English isn't their first language, but they'd actually clearly been able to ask the right questions to get a good response to it. So, but it was fun, but it shows you the challenge of you just relying entirely on AI. But it's good for events.
Absolutely, we need that human touch, and the events industry. You're running. One thing I wanted to ask you today was the pressure of running an event for events people. I've been fortunate enough for since the day that it began. I'm on the production team for an event in the UK called Event Tech Live. So we are a trade show specifically for event technology providers, and so the visitors who are coming through the door are all event professionals coming to find out about the latest developments in event tech. So in the same way that you guys run this event, everyone walking through the door thinks that they could probably do the job a little bit better than the new.
Yeah, well, it's funny. It's not that but everybody has a view.
Yeah.
What I find amusing is when we look at the free form in the research or the surveys we do afterwards, some of the questions you think, or the comments they make, thinking, are you really from the industry? Because what you've just asked for is the nirvana. If we could all achieve that, then happy days. But we know people aren't getting it. So, I'd imagine that the challenge for you is with some of your exhibitors, because they think their tech will be the best tech and therefore you should be using them. And why aren't you? exactly the same applies. You know, we're running a show in Melbourne. And in fact, the reason we run it and the Melbourne Convention Bureau don't is that we are that Chinese wall. So, you know, we run it as an independent, and in nice ways. When we talk sometimes with the Melbourne Convention Bureau, we have to say, no, we have, you know, what you would like to do is not necessarily the best thing for the show. So we have that show hat on, and in exactly the same way, you'll have exhibitors coming to you saying, we want this. You know, the direction of the show is more important, and the independence that you must have becomes really important. So yeah, look, I tell you, the worst thing the hardest thing we do is we actually do a welcome party. So we do a welcome event for everybody. So the way the format of the event works is it's 2 days of trade show. Yep. The day preceding, the first day, is an education day, and we'll have 1,500 people come through, and we have different education and different plenaries and so forth. Although I was reading yesterday that plenaries are out apparently, but the idea that we put all of them together, that there's obviously networking, there's learning, there's both personal and professional development going. And then we roll into the evening, and before the event even starts, we put on a function, a welcome party. For last year, it was 2,200 people. Wow. And so finding a venue that can take 2,200 people for a start is difficult and a challenge. And you know, we've always been able to find somewhere, and we will do again, but there will come that time when you either have to repeat or it won't quite work. And you kind of need to take the audience on the journey, especially as they are also event professionals, because they're by the grace of God go I. You know, we all are working in this industry, and we've got to understand that not everything's going to work all the time, but they're not very forgiving. So, you know, and you realize also, I mean, the learning for me was the welcome function 3 years ago. We did it at a football ground, Australian rules football, so it's a lot bigger. But fortunately, the weather was fantastic, and we had the roof open. But we, against my better judgment, I have to say, and that proves just how old I'm becoming. You know, our event director, Silke, really wanted us to have a band, and in the end we had a DJ, and so it ran from 7 till 10, but from 9 until 10 the DJ came on, and it just went off, and I do mean that. And I looked, and you've got all these young things going like this in the front, because the DJ was very well known, and they were having a party. But nobody really complained, because they'd had 2.5 hours of networking before that.
Sure.
And so it was this mixture of networking and then the party. The reason I mentioned it was on a football field was the great thing was the sound went up. So those who didn't want to necessarily dance or party on in that way were still able to talk. And it was a really successful event, and we've replicated the similar sort of format. So the last hour is entertainment, is music, and you know, we are seeing great traction. And of course, what happens is the first day of the trade show is everybody's up and about. They've had a great evening. We close at 10, so it's not a late evening. We shut it off at 10. They've had a good time. They've met new people. They're ready for the show, and it's but that creates the biggest. So that particular day, that evening, the only thing I could think about is, what the hell do we do next year? Because you could see immediately it was a success, you know.
It's a great sort of, not just concept is the wrong word, but the idea of getting people together socially before a business event like that, it unlocks inhibitions in some way. You know, it's almost like sort of turning up at a wedding, you know, where you've been invited and you maybe don't know anybody there. So the first sort of few hours is sort of dipping your toe in the water, maybe getting to know people around your table. You know, we've all been at sort of social events or weddings, particularly like that. Having something the night before to sort of break the ice, so that when people come into the main event the next day, they're kind of like, oh, well, I saw you last night. Oh, we had a drink. We met, didn't we? How are you? Great. It probably almost feels like you've got people's sort of, you know, adrenaline pumping already. So the moment they walk through the door, boom, they're straight into it.
And actually the education day helps as well, because if people are getting, if there's personal and professional development going on, they will actually bounce off each other. during that. And then if they meet each other in the evening, they have, a lot of networking, and our industry is about networking. Let's, I think we should all agree that we expect people to be able to talk to each other, and it's a skill, and it is a skill, but it can be a learned skill. But, they just need some point to talk about, so that ability to say, did you see such and such, or did you hear that? They're often running.
Yeah.
So we just give them these entry points, if you like, to conversations.
Yeah. And that, you're absolutely right. The entire industry is built on it. I'm a freelancer, a one-man band. I've worked as a freelancer for 15 years. I've never had business come via my website. Nobody's ever said, I found your website. People have said, your number's been passed to me by so-and-so who you worked for a couple of years ago. We're looking for somebody to come and help us out. It's either come through networking digitally, via groups, LinkedIn and Facebook, or networking on a, face-to-face, a human interaction level.
Agreed.
And as an example, I'm one person, but that is indicative and scalable for the entire industry. I'm absolutely certain of it. That's how these things work. Moving, I wanted to move on just to the topic of sustainability, if I may, because again, referring to one of the stories that's on the website as a takeaway from this year's event. Sustainability is now a business imperative, not just a trend, is how it was quoted on the AIME 25 website. Conversation has shifted from why should we be sustainable to how can we be regenerative. It's a topic, again, just to sort of compare from events that I've worked on in Europe and indeed in North America last year. Where is the sort of the level of the sustainability conversation over in Asia Pacific in the events industry?
So inevitably one talks about some countries, and you say, well, is sustainability being taken seriously, whether it's India or China or some of the larger developing countries? But when it comes to events, it's becoming much more of a hygiene factor than anything else. So you talk the trouble with sustainability is it's expected. But the ability to know whether what's being done is real and meaningful and so forth. So I think there's that whole area around greenwashing. Yeah. And so I'm very, in fact, I was in a conversation today, the Net Zero Carbon Events Initiative, which is being put forward by the industry, has I think got real merit because we're all talking in the same language. If there's a line out there, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And, but if you do know where you're going, then you've got a much more direct route to it. So we're working with the venue, the Melbourne Convention Exhibition Centre. We're working closely with them to actually say, well, let's work together on creating what that net carbon zero event journey looks like, because so much of it's at the venue. Whether it's food waste, whether it's all of those things. I mean, the big thing we have obviously is flights. Australia is a big country, and as you said, we get a lot of people coming in from overseas. So flights and carbon offsetting and so forth is something we must tackle, but it's not something that we can directly influence. There's a train that takes 12 hours to get from Sydney to Melbourne. It's not realistically an option. So, we're focusing on what we can do, and the sustainability around stand build, and all the venue activities is real. But yeah, it's moved away from, we're all sustainable and what does that mean, to being very, well, can you measure it? And how are you measuring it? And what are you measuring? And that becomes a much more meaningful thing.
And I guess one of your responsibilities going back to the fact that you're a show for, a trade event for event organizers, is one of your responsibilities is to facilitate that conversation, rather than sort of events being, you have to lead the way, one of your jobs is, well, we'll facilitate it, come here and discuss it. That's but one of the things that you can do it meaningfully.
There is definitely a role for an event. Forget us, but an event for an event for event for an industry must reflect the industry. We're not the industry, we reflect it. And therefore, if there's a hot button for any industry, we must put that on the table and prosecute the arguments for and against whatever it may be. Specifically for the events industry, sustainability is a really important play. And there's a lot of people working very hard on making things more sustainable. And we both have to challenge that we're doing it and applaud when it's done. So, there's a role to play, but you're right, we're there to actually accelerate the sustainable argument. And of course, all venues and all destinations will have a sustainable claim. And so and I don't mean to sound cynical. That's not absolutely not what it's about.
Sure.
Every claim, it's really making sure that they're meaningful and they are helping the ultimate goal, which is to save the planet.
We record this as we sit here today at the start of August. The event takes place in February, or took place in February this year. So you're already sort of halfway through your cycle. In effect, we're talking and very much reflecting on the successes and some of the headlines and takeaways from this year's event. But let's not forget that where we sit, you're now sort of equidistant to next year's. So, at what point does February this year become a distant memory, and how far down the road are you to next year?
March, it becomes a distant memory. If you like, once we've got the surveys in, once we've got, we know what worked and maybe what didn't work. And then we go out and do the research, and the surveys will tell us what did and didn't work as well. There's not usually any surprises in there, but there is some when you dig in deep. And I've got to tell you, AI is great. You get all that free form and you put it in, say, can you give me the things I should really look at? And it starts to flesh out some of those things. So from March, April time, we're really thinking about, we're working incredibly hard on the following year. So we had to, because we've grown the event again, we've had to change the floor plan. That took time because there's destination and location sensitivities that we need to consider. We're already best part of 80% sold or booked for next year. And so we're well on track. And the advantage of going out early with sales is obviously, one of the things that we do is we don't just bring in buyers. We actually match the buyers to the sellers. And we use, talking about tech, we use Grip, and the Grip meeting platform and the algorithms and the sort of AI machine learning that they have has been really strong for us because, and I don't mind plugging them because, ultimately, and we know once we've done the matching, we had about 20,000 meetings, of which 15,000 or thereabouts were preset. So before the show opened, we knew we had about 15,000 meetings, and we had a sort of match register, if you like, that there was a 80% match to what the buyer was looking for and what the seller was looking for. So we knew as we went in that actually the fundamentals of the show were being met. We knew that assuming those people turn up and meet, then the show will be a success. And whilst it's incredibly hard to do because we have to shut off early, and it takes a variety of iterations. We also know that Matt wants to see James, but it didn't necessarily come up as a match, so we'll force some of these, and that's personal knowledge. So sophisticated systems plus personal understanding of what our buyers and sellers, specific buyers and sellers, are looking at. That's been, we work incredibly hard so that serendipity is always going to be part of the show. But increasingly, people are saying, I want more than just those serendipitous moments. And hence the matching becomes really, really important.
And if I may, I'm just going to reference back to the sustainability conversation. People got very bogged down in this idea that sustainability is about using recycled coffee cups and reducing how much fuel that you're using. A sustainable event is one that works for people. and utilizing that sort of technology in the way that you've just described brings credence to the argument that we were having, several years ago, when a lot of event organizers were saying, oh, we don't want to get bogged down in all these tech platforms, it's going to take up so much time, and what we don't need to reinvent the wheel too much. But what you've just said shows that if you can allow serendipity to still be a thing and let people walk around a show floor, but if you can make their time at an event more effective and produce meetings that are of great quality, that to me ticks as much of a sustainable box as a recycled coffee cup.
Throw in the one thing that, or perhaps one thing that you're missing, is that the shift in, so if you look at how people used to do business, it would be kind of, I'll pick a city, I'm coming to London. So I'm in London, I fly over from Australia, I am going to meet all these different people.
Yeah.
Well, the chances are they're not in the office anymore. So when you say, I'm coming in on the 5th, can you see me that day? Oh, sorry, I'm working from home that day. So meeting people's become more difficult as well, because they're not necessarily in an office.
Sure.
So shows actually have a stronger opportunity because I'll see her there, and so it's just another. So the sustainability isn't just this wing and a prayer of I'll fly in and see people because they'll see me, I've just arrived. Business has moved on. So the events, if they're done properly, all the usual things. We stop the amount of sales travel that has to go. We slow it down because we're getting everybody into one place. So I think there's lots of different ways, but the principle behind we will help you meet the people that you need to meet rather than just hope you meet them is something we're seeing as a bit of a trend within events in general, I think.
No, absolutely. And I'm really pleased that, from a selfish perspective, being part of a show called Event Tech Live, it's great to hear that, platforms like Grip and there's others out there, but, I know Grip and I've used it, on our event, and what you've just described there is exactly what it was set up to do, is to make those events more effective, better value for the visitors and the people that are coming there, and to produce some, statistics like the ones that we've seen. And without those platforms, we wouldn't be able to have the statistics that we've now got available and the data that we've now got available to us as organizers. You can see how many interactions there were, which is something that, 25 years ago or 20 years ago, when I attended my first ever trade show at the NEC in Birmingham, was, completely wet behind the ears. Wow, what is this? You literally walked through the door and hoped that something would happen.
So we had screens running in the media room and elsewhere with important data for the day, and on day one, towards the end of the day, we've had and I can't remember all the numbers, so I'm going to make some up. But one of them is certainly real. So we would have said we've got 675 exhibitors, or we've got 3,000 visitors are on the show floor. But the most important one, the one that resonated with me, it was at the top. It said we've had 10,245 meetings so far today. And that just cut across everything else, because in a way, how many people are on the show floor and all those things are vanity statistics. If you've got the wrong people on the floor, then it doesn't matter how many of them you've got, they're still wrong. But if there's active meetings taking place between the right people, then that's a very real business event.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's, on day one, just doing the quick maths here, 10,000 meetings, 675 exhibitors, it's just over 14 meetings per exhibitor. And they're the ones that you've got logged, via the technology. That's not including the serendipitous ones or quick conversations they might have when they bump into each other when they get a coffee. Oh, nice to see you. Why don't we have a quick chat here off the stand about some business? To just have that as a base statistic, is amazing.
And of course, we then said, "Oh, we'll double it." But the reality is, second day of a show, late in the afternoon, people are thinking more about getting home than they are about another meeting. But we were able to capture it all. And so, I think that the event tech in events again, it's coming back to what we were talking about earlier with AI. They're enhancing what we do. They're challenging us actually in saying, are you being really efficient with your show?
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. I've got one eye on the clock and thinking that it's very late in the day, very late in the day for you, and you've been very generous with your time in staying in the office. You've got some awards. I must just point out, if you're listening to today's podcast, hop over to eventindustrynews.com and check out the video version. We've got some rather nice, shiny looking award trophies
They
just
are
in the
good, aren't they?
background there. That very well placed as well in the shot. Should I say? What are they for? Let's just ask that
So
before we wrap up.
So it's a very pretty award, and it's really AIME has been at the Australian event exhibition and conference of the year for the Australian Event Awards, 22, 23 and 24. We've put in for this year. We don't know whether how we'll go.
Well, let's hope that when we talk to you this time next year, we can do so with a fourth trophy in the
Let's do
background.
that. I'll make sure I've got all four. James, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Not a problem. We've been talking today to the CEO of Talk 2 Media and Events, Matt Pearce, about the Asia Pacific Incentives and Meetings event 2025 and indeed 2026. AIME 2026 returns to Melbourne next year. AIME.com, AIME.com.au is the website. Please do go and check out what those guys are doing over there, and let us know indeed if you're an exhibitor or a visitor to the event. Love to hear from you. Just a couple of quick shout outs before we wrap today. I said that if you're listening to today's podcast via your podcast platform, please do make sure you go over to eventindustrynews.com to check out video versions of all of our podcasts. But while you are there, check out the A to Z supplier directory. If you're working in the events industry and you need a product, service, or a supplier, the chances are you will find it within the A to Z supplier directory over on eventindustrynews.com. Of course, you may have started your journey today on the website by watching the video version of this podcast. Thank you very much for doing so. If that's what you've done, please don't forget to go in the opposite direction and make sure that you are subscribed to the Event Industry News podcast wherever you get your audio podcasts from. My thanks again to my guest today, Matt Pearce, for taking the time to join us. My name's James Dixon. This has been the Event Industry News podcast, and we'll see you on the next edition. Thanks, everybody.